unmute myself. Sorry about that. Greetings, everyone. Dale Parrish, COS Indiana Live host. And with me this evening, as usual, is my co-host, Mr. Ken Kashuba. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Dale. How you doing?
Good. Ken, you're not supposed to be here today, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm supposed to be taking a little hiatus, a little R&R time, and best laid plans,
Well, tell us what happened real quick.
Well, yeah, my wife and I had I've got a birthday coming up tomorrow, and the wife and I decided we were going to take a little time and enjoy 3 days in the mountains of the Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, and
well, I don't see any problem with that. That sounds very nice.
No, it was all all done and ready to go, and we had everything packed, and we're supposed to spend 2 or 3 days down in Gatlinburg in a little tiny house cabin that we were going to rent.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so Sunday afternoon at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got a little notice from the owners of the property saying your trip is canceled.
Well, what possibly could have been the problem, Ken?
Yeah, I think they've only had maybe 15, 20 inches of rain down there or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So what happened basically is that they've had some flooding, roads, but what the basic problem, the major problem, we still could have probably made it in with some back roads, but the major problem was the flooding caused the water. They had to shut off all the water to all the properties.
Oh wow!
No water available. So yeah.
Wow. Well, I hope you'll be able to recoup that and get that done at some other time. But
we'll find
what a mess that part of our country is undergoing. What a terrible mess and travesty, quite honestly.
I think last I heard that there was well over 100 people that have died.
Yeah. Wow.
Terrible storm.
Anyway, happy birthday. I hope you have a good birthday tomorrow.
Thanks. We'll do it.
All right. Ken, how about giving us a little scenario on this QR code up here?
Yeah, the one that's over your head for a change, or over your shoulder. That one.
Yeah.
I won't ask you to point to it because you'll probably point the wrong direction. But yeah,
I did, didn't I?
There you go. That little QR code there is for your smartphone. People that are watching that would like to subscribe to our channel, COSIL, have a nice little platform available for you to join in to get some free videos and educational material, a lot of different things that we're supplying there for our subscribers, along with a platform that you can basically interact with others that subscribe to our channel as well. So it's a nice little family community you can join, and it shows your support for COSIL. So we hope you'll subscribe to that, and I will post a URL code in the chat as well.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, Ken, let's get started tonight. The first thing on our agenda tonight is I want to play the second part of my interview with Mark Archer from a few weeks ago. Mark and his wife, Amber, own Fearless Features, and they're the ones that have produced the documentaries. Some we have featured on our broadcast here. Dysphoria was the last one that we dealt with. Well, they have a brand new one out called Title IX. Now, we've already gone through part one of my interview with him. And we basically, in that interview, we talked about the early years of Fearless Features, how they developed their organization, some of his background, and talked a little bit about some of their past documentaries. So when we pick up here, we're going to be getting into what's going on with Title IX, this newest documentary. But first, I'm going to give us a little refresher here. I'm going to play one of the trailers that they have out. Not a very long one, but it'll kind of give you a little idea of what we're getting into here with Title IX, this latest documentary. So after the trailer plays, then I'll go right into the second part of my interview. So here we go.
The Biden administration is amending Title IX to expand protections to LGBTQ students in schools that receive federal funding.
How big is the scope of this change?
Well, sweeping changes, Marquis, very much so. Schools are digesting it over the weekend. It not only impacts colleges, but it impacts federally funded schools, K through 12.
The fact that the Biden administration and many in this country have basically lost their moral compass, okay? They absolutely have. The fact that we will now push women out of positions simply because there are people out there that want to identify as an opposite sex.
When I saw the news on what Joe Biden just did to women's rights and Title IX and due process for young men on college campuses and free speech, I was horrified.
So let's go. Title IX, and you said it was basically leftovers from dysphoria, and because I have viewed the movie, the documentary Title IX, and I quickly recognized individuals in this one from dysphoria.
Yeah.
So continue on with that. Then why you chose to get into that particular topic?
Well, so Title IX, like I said, the whole issue of what the politicians are trying to do by weaponizing Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which is what we've seen the Biden administration do. So we knew when we were doing our initial research for dysphoria that this was going to be something that was going to come onto the radar. And so while we were interviewing people like former Attorney General Curtis Hill and others that were in dysphoria, any of them we had several attorneys that we interviewed. Any of them that we could talk to about the legalities of things like Title IX, we did. And when we were putting dysphoria together, that was, as you can see, Title IX is a little over an hour long, and that was originally part of dysphoria. But if I left it all in dysphoria,
yeah, that would have
had a 3-hour plus movie.
Right.
So this was all stuff that basically got pulled out and set aside, and after we had dysphoria out for a while, we said there's another movie in there, it's a good hour at least, and so we put it together, and it's pretty good. So
it sure is, and it's a very very hot topic. I mentioned to you mentioned Moms for Liberty earlier. We've had Natalie Forbing on our program, and the last time we had her on, she was talking about Title IX, and so when I saw that you had put out this documentary, that really caught my attention, and it's certainly a pertinent topic. Now, tell us kind of, if you can kind of give us what the status is on Title IX. I think it's blocked for right now. Am I right?
Yeah. The best understanding that I have right now is that it's been blocked. The efforts. So you got to back up. There's another case that you have to understand as to why this all came about, and there was a case that was ruled earlier this year, I think early summer, if I remember right, regarding Chevron deference.
Yes.
And this goes back to a case involving Chevron oil back in the early 80s, if I remember, where essentially the courts said, in lieu of any other information, the bureaucratic institutions are deemed as the experts, right?
Right.
So this is what has led to the bureaucratic administrative state where, and I my best example is the ATF, where they just craft new rules and they say, well, we've decided that this piece of plastic, this called a bump stock, this is a machine gun and you can't have it. Or a forced reset trigger is now a machine gun and you can't have it. And they go around and start, arresting people and confiscating things where Congress has not passed a law, but they have been given basically this power to write rules that have the force of law. Well, Chevron deference was overturned earlier this year by the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And this has started to really unravel the administrative state. And so what has happened now is the Biden administration said, well, we're going to we have interpreted the ruling on this other case called Bostock v. Garland to mean that that transgenderism and sexual preference and sexual orientation is all considered under the word sex in the the Civil Rights Act, Title IX. So the original Civil Rights Act passed in 64, and then Title IX, I think, was added in 71. If I may get the year wrong, I think 71. And so they've basically said, well, wherever it says sex, that means sexual orientation, gender fluid, transgender. That's what that means. So they're just rewriting the definitions of things.
Right.
And so that is so the Supreme Court put a halt to that and said, you can't do that. My understanding, though, is that it's not over. So it's been kind of kicked back down to the lower courts again, and it will still be going on. And in the end of the film, we basically say, by the time you watch this, it may be this or this or this.
Right. Yes, I remember that. Yes.
I can't predict where this is going to go, but you have to understand the process that they're doing, and whether it's Title IX or something else, this is what they're doing over and over again. This is how you stop it.
Yes. Which kind of leads me to another question I have here. Two individuals in Title IX, and they were actually in dysphoria too.
Mm-hmm.
Two individuals that I really locked on to, and that's Jeff Younger and Alex Newman.
Yeah.
And just speaking of their part in Title IX, by the way, Alex Newman, for everyone's information, I think we're going to have him on in October as a guest on COS Indiana Live. I really think these individuals in Title IX, they really described the process of how things like this come about.
Mm-hmm.
And Curtis Hill was very, very good on this too. But you might want to comment on this if you would, please. I told you that an old Rush Limbaugh term, incrementalism.
Yeah.
I guess that was his term. I don't know where it originated, but I think this is basically what they're talking about. If you understand what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I hope to have Alex Newman on to talk further about this. But that's how this has all come about. Am I right? It's an example.
Yeah, this has been a process for anyone who has studied the plans of the global communists will know that they have said for decades that they're going to do their long march through the institutions, and that they're going to collapse Western civilization from within by causing rot. And that is what they have done systematically. And as you go back and look, in fact, in Dysphoria, we reference the communist goal, the 45 communist goals that were read into the congressional record in 63. And there's a great book on that called The Naked Communist, which goes through all of those and really lays out, listen, they have succeeded in all of these. and it talks about how they're going to destroy our civilization by making everything backwards, basically, and corrupting through pornography and corrupting institutions and that. So it's incrementalism is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And that's what they've done. They've done it successfully with the educational system, through the courts, and do you get to where we are now, to where, you know, to corrupt the courts, you have to corrupt the schools. To corrupt the schools, you have to corrupt the professors. To corrupt the professors, you you know, you catch them at earlier and earlier phases, and a lot of this also came about, if you look in U.S. history and study something, which we didn't get into in particular in Inwood Drive, but Inwood Drive is about George Klopfer, who was a German immigrant who became an abortionist. What people don't know, if you read the companion book, I wrote a companion book to Inwood Drive, and I know I'm on a rabbit trail here, but I'll come back.
That's okay.
Klopfer, the way that he came to America was his dad, Oscar, was a Nazi scientist. Oscar Klopfer worked for a company called IG Farben Industries. He was a chemical engineer, and IG Farben Industries developed things like sarin nerve gas. Okay. There was a program that the CIA initiated at the end of World War II called Operation Paperclip. And there is a book specifically about this called Operation Paperclip. It's about that thick.
Wow.
And basically what Operation Paperclip did was they went and they stole all the Nazi scientists and brought them to America and said, hey, we'll wipe the slate clean if you come and work for us. And that's how we got our space program. I mean, Werner von Braun was one of these guys, right?
Oh, okay.
And Oscar Klopfer was one of these guys. And Oscar went to work for the Army, and his son went to work killing 30 to 50,000 American babies.
Wow.
But the point there is that a lot of the gut rot that started infiltrating America post World War II was all of these Nazi scientists being brought over, Nazi and communist scientists, but mostly Nazis, being brought out from Germany and brought over here, and they were put into the universities.
Wow.
And so that's where this kind of got turbocharged.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, if you could comment, I know Jeff Younger has kind of a personal experience with this whole process. Am I right? You want to kind of give everyone a little idea of what he was, what he expresses in the in Title IX?
In Title IX, yeah. Well, you have to understand a little bit about Jeff Younger's story, and it's been all over the news. Even national headlines, Fox News has talked about it. Jeff, his ex-wife, who is a pediatrician, ironically, decided one day that their youngest son, James, was really a girl. And she, when he objected, she took him to court and filed for divorce and forced him out of the house. And the courts have basically allowed his ex-wife to start transitioning their son James, and he has fought her for, I mean, it's probably been going on for a decade now, and he has lost virtually every battle because of the family courts. And so if you want to hear that story, you need to watch Dysphoria.
Yes.
He talks about, in Title IX, he talks about how in his research in trying to defend his son, and by the way, he's, as far as we know, he is still lost that, and he's lost his son, both of his sons.
Wow.
And she has fled. He's from Texas. His wife took their sons to California,
Yeah.
which is a sanctuary state for trannies. So, so Jeff talks about how this agenda has come about and how they have incrementally, and by they we're talking about the left, the commies on the left, how they have incrementally infiltrated the family courts and that by manufacturing scientific facts. And it's a very fascinating process, very diabolical process. And as he explains it, and then we show currently how this is now being done, and where, because you watch it and you think, oh my word, how long were they working on this, and what could they possibly be doing now? And we show people what they're doing now. So what took them decades to do in normalizing homosexuality and transgenderism, now they're trying to normalize pedophilia.
Yes.
Through this same process, and it is rapidly accelerating because they are emboldened now.
Yeah. And you've got a clip or so in Title IX about that too.
Yeah.
About pedophilia.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Mark, I think, am I correct? I know in both Dysphoria and Title IX, you talk about Marxism, socialism, communism.
Mm-hmm.
I know you talked about the Communist Manifesto, especially in Dysphoria, you talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
I personally believe this is at the root of a lot of what's happening in this country. So you still feel strongly about this, these ideologies and the effect that they're having on our country?
Oh, absolutely. Because all you have to do is read the Communist Manifesto.
Yes.
Read the Humanist Manifesto and the Communist Manifesto. I mean, those are your starts, right? And you can read those both in an hour. And it's very clear that the goal of communism, the goal of the humanists, which communists are all humanists,
right?
Now, that's not to be confused with the humanities. Humanists believe that man is the center of all things. Well, that's what communist atheists believe too, that there is no God, that man is the center of all. The state is above all because it is man's, ascension to ultimate utopia. And so their goal has always been the destruction of Western society. How do you do that? You destroy freedom, you destroy liberty, you destroy the nuclear family, you destroy the fathers, and that is what they have done. And so this goes all the way back to Alfred Kinsey, even further than Alfred Kinsey. But Alfred Kinsey was really the first one that really made a major impact, and we talk all about him in The Mind Polluters and his legacy and how that started what was called the sexual revolution in America, which has led us to where we are now.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. I do believe these ideologies are at the center of this. Yep.
Yes, they absolutely are.
Well, let's wind it up here, Mark. What's next? You got anything that you can give us a hint as to what or is it going to be more leftovers? In the short term, I think there probably is a spin-off film from The Mind Polluters that we're probably going to do next. Okay.
We had an enormous amount of story information in The Mind Polluters that we had to cut. There's a whole lot more about Kinsey. There's a whole lot more about things like MK Ultra and the CIA's involvement with Kinsey and Hugh Hefner and things like that. So,
oh my,
yeah, and where Kinsey got his test subjects is a really demented tale. So probably that there is maybe a spin-off from Inwood Drive that we've thought about. There's another documentary title that we would like to do when the time is right, called Laodicea, which is about the last church age. And so we have been talking about that one for about a year. It's just a matter of, time and resources. And we have plans to do some dramatic films again too. It's been several years since I've directed a dramatic movie. But
Really?
we've got some good stories that we've acquired that we're developing scripts on. And
Do you and Amber, just the two of you, decide what's next, or do you consult with some other sources? Or
well, the main source we consult with is the Lord.
okay,
So,
that's a good source.
yeah, we're in prayer about these things all the time, and
All right.
the Lord guides where he wants you to go. We do, there are some, when we start talking about going and doing dramatic films again, then there are people that I have to bring on to consult.
Sure.
Because documentaries we can do as a husband and wife team. You can't do a dramatic film with two
Right,
people.
I understand.
It takes the whole team. So
Okay, well, you're going to be downtown here in Fort Wayne on the 14th.
yes.
And I think, did I hear you? The next preview would be up in Elkhart. Am I right?
Yes, and that is late October. We had to reschedule it. If you give me a second, I can pull it up on the calendar here.
Okay.
It is October 25th. October 25th at Real Church in Elkhart, Indiana.
Real Church, Elkhart, Indiana. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Show starts at 7.
7. Okay. All right. Good. Well, Mark, I want to thank you very much for your time today. It's been very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope you'll come back again and talk to us again in the future.
Yeah.
Because I really believe in what you're doing. And I think as far as our organization, Convention of States, I think you and Amber are doing exactly what we believe in. So again, I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any final words, this would be the time to say it. Otherwise,
sure.
We'll sign off.
Sure. Well, I guess I should mention that if you can't make it on Saturday, you can watch the film right now. You can go to title9movie.com. And that takes you to specifically where you can rent it, and you can stream it on your smart device using the app that's built in there. It's the Vimeo app. Now, Vimeo kicked us off once before for the mind polluters, but we're giving it a try.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we got deplatformed. That's a whole other discussion, but we've decided that we're going to give it a try again. So.
Well, we've been kicked off of YouTube a time or two too, so I know what you mean.
Yeah. So
anyway,
it's at title9movie.com, and you can watch it right now.
All right, Mark. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you again.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Well, Dale, unmute yourself so we can.
I got to remember to do that.
That's a little button there. You got to push that button.
Very interesting guy. He and Amber are both very interesting people, and they're really, I think they're doing some great work. I want to throw up here their website, fearlessfeatures.org, and you can go right on there, and they've got information about all their past movies as well as Title IX, and he's right, you can rent it. So very reasonable. I think it was $4.99 the last time price I saw. So and I want to remind everybody again, I went to the review on September 14th downtown here in Fort Wayne.
Did you?
And I had a good Mark made a presentation and went through the movie and very, very much enjoyed it. And mention again, he said October 25th at Real Church in Elkhart, 7 p.m. So everyone, please make note of that.
Yep.
Well, I want to now, let's move on to the next video that we have. And if you all remember, we've been doing a series called Meet the Founders. And Larry Hudson, one of our region captains, heads this up, doing a fantastic job. He's brought us George Mason and Thomas Jefferson. And some weeks ago, we got started on George Washington. And we got through, Larry's kind of long-winded.
Well, that's because he takes a deep dive. Dale.
He does. He uncovers a great deal of information. And of course, people like George Washington, there's a ton of information out there. And so we got through what we called part one, segment one. Okay. And what we're going to present now is part one, segment two. Okay. Now, in segment one, we basically covered his early childhood, his father, mother, siblings, his education, and got into his even his relationship with his mother, which was a strained relationship. Mm. So when we start here on this next segment, we're going to pick up where how he got involved in slavery. So I hope you enjoy this. Like I said, Larry just does a fantastic job on it, and we're looking forward to even more on George Washington. So before he moves on to another founder. So without hesitation, let's get started with this part one, segment two of George Washington. Interesting. Well, let's talk about the slaves. You mentioned that he inherited slaves upon his father's death. And I remember this was the case with Jefferson when you were talking about Thomas Jefferson, that he inherited slaves. But I seem to remember that Jefferson freed his slaves upon his death. Excuse me, Washington did, but Jefferson didn't do that. Right? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's true. We touched on that earlier. Washington would go on to inherit, purchase, or I think he even rented more than 500 slaves at Mount Vernon during the time he lived there until the time he died. When he married Martha Dandridge Custis, she was a very wealthy woman whose husband had died. His name was Custis. And Washington gained approximately 18,000 acres and another 84 slaves as a part of her dowry from her first husband's estate. Now, she retained the rights to those slaves. She didn't legally own them. But in doing so, he became one of the wealthiest men in Virginia at that time, which increased his social standing among his peers. And I think it's fascinating to know that Washington's first love wasn't Martha.
Oh.
No, it was the wife of one of his best friends. Was Sally Fairfax. She was 2 years older than George, and she was married, as I said, to his best friend, George William Fairfax. And Washington even corresponded with her while he was engaged to marry Martha, according to what I read. A letter survives wherein he wrote to her 2 weeks before his wedding, and he stated, let me give you the quote, "The world has no business to know the object of my love, declared in this manner to you when I want to conceal it." And then it goes on to speak of, quote, "of a destiny that divides him from the object of his love."
Wow.
This is 2 weeks prior to his marriage.
Is that right? And what was her name?
Sally Fairfax.
Sally Fairfax.
Actually, her maiden name was Carrie, and she herself was wealthy in her own right. And then she married into the Fairfax family, which was probably one of the wealthiest families in Virginia at the time. And it'll even get more interesting when we talk about George's older half brother, Lawrence.
Well, okay, this is interesting, Larry. But let's get back to the subject of the slaves and how he freed the slaves upon his death. So, can you delve into that a bit?
Yeah, I have a little bit much more, I should say, on that later. But for right now, let me say that it appears, from what I have read, that his views on slavery really changed over time. So before it's over, I think he will have done the right thing, and people will come to appreciate that. But early on, Washington was a slave owner, and he dealt in slaves. When the Revolutionary War came and was over, I think he came to question slavery more from a moral standpoint. But economically, in his position as a plantation owner, a planter, slavery was an absolute necessity in the production of the crops, tobacco primarily. But he couldn't morally justify it, though he never really lobbied that I can find publicly for its abolition. He does, as we said earlier, he does free the slaves, his slaves, those that he could, upon his deathbed. He really never got away from slavery or extricated himself from it during his lifetime because he was a plantation owner right up to his death. He did free approximately 122 or 3 slaves that he owned at the time of his death by way of his will. But that was less than half of the number that he owned total. Those that were owned by the Custis estate through his wife were not his to liberate, so they remained in her custody and in her family line, and they were eventually inherited by Martha's grandchildren after she died.
Okay. Well, I remember you mentioning that Washington was the only founding father to provide support for, and here comes this term, manumission, that we've talked about. He was the only founding father that provides support for the manumission of his freed slaves. Now, what do you mean by that?
Well, we all know that Lincoln freed the slaves through the Emancipation Proclamation. Manumission is somewhat like emancipation, but emancipation is a government edict, where manumission is a term that was used in those days. I don't know that it's, we don't have slavery today, so I don't know that the term is in anybody's lexicon, but it's the voluntary freeing of someone who has an indentured servant or a slave under their control. They voluntarily do that either while they're living or upon their death through their will. So Washington manumitted his slaves. I'll start with the first one that comes to mind, which was William Lee. Lee was his, I think he called him his valet or his valet and a personal assistant. And he provided him with a lifetime pension of $30 in those days, and the right to live at Mount Vernon for the rest of his life, which Lee chose to do. And Lee was the only one of Washington's slaves to be freed outright in his will. According to one historian, Lee rode alongside Washington in the thick of battle, ready to hand over to the general a spare horse, his telescope, or whatever else might be needed. Lee was rather famous, actually, as a servant of Washington. And because he served by Washington's side throughout the war, and he was depicted next to Washington in several paintings. Washington crossing the Delaware, which is a famous painting we all recognize, comes to my mind. And Lee is in that painting, right in front of Washington, kneeling down in the boat. You can just see his face.
Mm.
He made provisions in his will also for the slaves that he freed, for their financial support and education. He I guess, guaranteed or ordered, if you will, that they be financially supported and educated. His executors were to establish a permanent fund out of his assets to provide them clothing and food if they were too elderly or too sick to support themselves. He further specified that young children without parents, they be placed under the guardianship of a court, that they be taught to read and write, and to be apprenticed in what he called a useful occupation. I'm not sure what that meant, but it sounds like the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
He also sternly forbade his executors from selling or transporting any slaves out of the state before the terms of his will went into effect. Now, all this was to occur after the death of his wife, Martha, not upon his death, but after her death.
Oh.
Now, but he died in 1799, and it turns out Martha, she decided to free the slaves early, and then the very next year she signed a deed of manumission to make that happen. So, as I said at the outset, Washington was a man who was both conflicted and complicated, and slavery was certainly one of those complicating and conflicting areas that he had to deal with.
Yeah. Now, I remember you telling us about Jefferson, who was also a Virginian, right?
Yeah.
But he wasn't able to free his slaves while Washington did, and it was because of state law that precluded all this, right?
And it's the fact that they were both Virginians. Virginia was a leading slave state, and they had probably the most restrictive laws on slavery of any of the slave states. Toward the end of the American Revolution, the Virginia legislature, I read, passed a law that made it legal for slaveholders to manumit their slaves without going to the governor. Previously, you had to go to the governor or to a governor's council and request a special act of permission if you wanted to release a slave or slaves. But in the early 1800s, about the time Jefferson was becoming president, they repealed much of that law and made it impossible economically to free slaves. You had to provide everything for them. You had to, for every single slave, you had to provide money, and you also had to pay for his movement out of the state of Virginia. They could no longer reside in the state. And so Jefferson, he was drowning in debt, and he simply couldn't meet the requirements of that law.
Okay. All right. Well, have we pretty well covered then Washington as a young man? We pretty well covered that, right?
Right.
And
well, through his teenage years, he's not yet 20.
Okay. All right. And what's the part about his quest to become a military officer for the crown? Is that?
That's true.
And this was
remember, this is prior to 1775, 1776.
Right.
We're still British colonies, and there's a lot of loyalty to the crown. We haven't become disenfranchised as of yet. We haven't had the Intolerable Acts or the Stamp Act or the tax on tea or any of that sort of thing. None of that's happened yet. So, yeah, he wanted to be a military officer in the worst way. He was surveyor, and that gave him the opportunity to be in the wilds of basically the wilds of Virginia, what's now West Virginia, Ohio, the Ohio Valley. I mean, he was a real, well, he probably traveled farther west than any individual colonialist had up to that point in time. Maybe trappers or somebody like that had, but no one of his stature had done that. And his father's early death, as I said, prevented him from getting this formal education. But his two older half brothers, they had the education. And I should say, I mentioned Lawrence a while back would come into to view again. Lawrence married up, as they say.
All right.
Lawrence married into this Fairfax family that I had mentioned earlier.
Okay.
He married Anne Fairfax, who was the daughter of Colonel William Fairfax, who was a cousin and the agent for Lord Fairfax. Lord Fairfax, it turns out, was the only titled, he was a baron, he was the only titled Englishman, nobleman to come and actually reside in the colonies. And he lived here throughout his life, right up to his death. And Lawrence's marriage to Anne brought with it much land and much money. And he was able in short order to build a house on 2,500 acres. And he named it Mount Vernon. Lawrence named it.
Oh, he did. Okay. Oh, that's it. All right.
It was in honor of an admiral Vernon, who Lawrence had served under in the Royal Navy. Lawrence was not in the Navy. He was a soldier for the British, but he fought a naval campaign in the Caribbean under this admiral, and he respected him. And so that's where the name came from. But living with George living with Lawrence, George got into some real genteel lifestyle, culturally elite lifestyle with the Fairfaxes. And it was here that Washington was introduced to Sally Fairfax.
Oh, okay.
The lady that I mentioned earlier, his paramour.
Yeah.
She was Anne's sister-in-law. And so he learned proper etiquette, good manners, civility, that sort of thing. But it didn't deter him as a teenager from still pursuing surveying as a profession. And so he became a friend of Lord Fairfax, who owned all this land. And the effect of this relationship, it will become significant. And it will lead to a military career, as you'll see.
All right. Well, I can tell this is fascinating, Larry. But looking at the clock, I think we're out of time here on this segment, or this part, I should say. All right. Looking forward to the next part. Okay.
There's, as I said, I find it fascinating. He's an interesting person.
Well, you're doing a great job. Thank you very much, Larry.
See you next time.
See ya.
Okay.
Well, Ken, I tell you, Larry really digs into it, doesn't he?
I tell you what, if people didn't learn something new about George Washington, they never will.
Yeah, I'm really picking up some good stuff from all of his research so far. Yes, and there'll be much more to come. So, got to hand it to him, man. He's really good about this. Well, folks, let's move on here and tell you a little bit about what's coming up. Our next broadcast, live broadcast, will be October 7th. And one of the things we're going to present there is a letter that our Wendy Olson, who heads up the Pillars of Freedom series, and Wendy is very much a January 6th advocate, and she was asked to appear at a House hearing in Washington, D.C. And the hearing was held by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. Wendy couldn't go, but she wrote a letter. And the letter was presented at the hearing. And I've asked Ken, everyone, to read that letter because I thought it was just an excellent letter. And it really sums up what she's trying to do with the January 6th, not only the prisoners, but their families and the people that have been affected by all this. And really, I thought the letter just sums up what she's trying to do, and of course, then what we're trying to do, and by presenting this to everyone. So, I think what take about 5-6 minutes to read the letter, right, Ken? So,
yeah, it was a little over 6 minutes. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
Ken does a good job. He did a dissertation like this with Jeremy Brown back some weeks ago. So that'll be very good. Also on that program on October 7th, hopefully I will have recorded and my interview with two people that head up a group that deals with January 6th families. As a matter of fact, the two of them, Mark and Jaleese Middleton, are actually prisoners. They're not in a prison, but they have been tried and convicted, and they've been waiting for their sentencing for some months now. And it keeps getting delayed. This is all part of what these people are going through. Okay.
Right.
So I hope to have the first part of my interview with them recorded in time for October 7th. Then we're going to have Gary Harbaugh presenting us another episode on the debt avalanche, our national debt, and hope to have Dale Tipton come on and give us a summary on how we did in Indiana here in Convention of States for the month of September. So ought to be a jam-packed program on October 7th, Ken.
Yep. I believe people just don't. I mean, at this point, time in our 24 to 36 hour news cycle, people tend to forget things so quickly that. That
is right. That's right.
And I don't think people realize, how deep of a reach the effects of those people that were caught up in that has, and as I don't know, Dale, the older I get, I look back at decades now and just never dreamed that our country could be, I don't even think I have a term for it, but when you see some of the things that have gone on, it makes you ponder some of the history that I'll say never learned from, or we read about it, or we're taught about some of these things in history that we looked at as disgusting and immoral, yet we never thought that some of those things could actually occur right here in our lifetime in our country.
That's right. We had an interview lined up with another January 6th prisoner, Jake Lang. I believe I got that name right. Mm-hmm. He's been in prison over 1,300 days without a trial. And the interview got canceled because he's just been put in solitary confinement. So, and I don't know why, but anyway, it's just the process and the treatment. I'm not trying to justify what happened on January 6th. I'm just saying these people should not be treated this way. Many of these people are vets, and outstanding patriots and citizens, and they should not be treated this way. So that's coming up October 7th. And then our next roundtable will be October 28th. And John Huckelman's topic is the Bill of Rights. Don't you dare. So these are forbidden things, according to John, per our Bill of Rights. So it ought to be very, very interesting topic. So Bill of Rights, don't you dare. So anyway, once again, our email address, raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. So if any of you, any viewers tonight have comments or questions, drop us an email, raiseyourvoicecos@gmail.com. So Ken, we'll close out our broadcast tonight again with another episode from John Ackerman on COS basics. This episode has to do with Congress deciding how votes are to be held at a convention. I think this is another myth that he's going to bust. And again, John's doing a great job. We've got, he just sent us episode number 27, didn't he?
Yeah.
Or no. Or is it 29? Now I can't remember now.
29. Yeah, 29.
29?
Mm-hmm.
So, folks, we've got many, many more to come. And all these you'll be able to see as a subscriber to COS Indiana Live. So we're going to put all these together for you. That's a little perk that you get by becoming a subscriber to COS Indiana Live. So with that said, we'll run John's COS basics video here and then sign off. So everyone, thank you for tuning in tonight. And once again, we appreciate everyone. And we'll keep at it here, and we'll be back with you on October 7th. So good night, everyone.
Stay safe out there.
John Ackerman for Convention of States, Indiana. In my ongoing series on COS basics, I'm having some fun busting myths. And this myth says that Congress will decide how votes are cast and how votes are counted. Congress, not the convention. This myth goes on to say that this will look a lot like the Electoral College, where big states get a lot of votes, like California and New York, and little states get 3 votes. That's the minimum. Well, the fact is that neither Congress's power to call the convention nor its necessary and proper powers from Article 1 can be used to prescribe how votes will be counted. We know from history and from precedent that all states will be given equal voting strength because a convention of states is a meeting of equal sovereigns. By the way, remember that a lot of what I'm saying is found on conventionofstates.com on the web, so you can get more details and even sources backing up what I'm saying. Call a convention does not mean control a convention. And a review of the founding era convention calls reveals that the power to call a convention is limited to specifying the time, place, and purpose for the convention. Founding era calls did not try to control the composition, rules, or conduct of the convention. All they did was designate the time, place, and purpose. It's a fact that Congress may not use its necessary and proper powers to control the convention. The necessary and proper clause of the Constitution applies only to the powers enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. In a court case called Idaho versus Freeman, the courts held that Congress's power to participate in the amendment process stems solely from Article 5. Question comes up, why equal voting? Because a convention of states is a meeting of equal sovereigns. States at a convention would each have the same voting strength, similar to the way member countries in NATO or the United Nations have equal voting strength. One nation, one vote, one state, one vote. And it's always been that way. Every interstate convention that's ever been held in America was one state, one vote. There is one exception to this. It was a convention in the late 1800s where each state got 8 votes. But even in that case, no state had greater voting strength than any other state. Think about the founders' intent. We know what the founders intended from the ratification debates: one state, one vote, and majority rules at the convention. And so the myth that Congress must decide how votes are cast and counted, busted.